What is up, everybody? We're live. Thank you, network of ours, for joining. Seems like we have a lot of attendees today. Month-end sales panel, always super exciting. Getting a whole bunch of people sharing ideas. I'm excited. Um, Somehow it's already the end of October, so we're talking about episode 37 this year, which is crazy. We won't go there probably in this one, but I think we've all been waiting for the results of the US election as well from a sales perspective. So hopefully next month we'll be able to see what we'll talk about. Like, are we finally seeing that we've run out of excuses? But anyhow, thank you to our panel guests for being here today. 3 of the 4 of us are here. We have someone else who will be joining midway, but that's all good. Before we dive into intros, I just want to say thank you to anybody who is going to be watching here live on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. We are on a different app, right? So we will see your comments come in. If they are over a certain character length, they might get cut short. So I apologize if that happens. In the interest of confidentiality and privacy, we're not going to name you on the video, which will be up afterwards, because we don't want to get you in trouble if you're supposed to be working right now or whatever. So we won't name you, but we will. In a lull in the conversation, I'll happily just go through. And so if you do, feel free to share anything on the sales front or otherwise, questions, comments, anecdotes. The whole thing here is talking about challenges, changes that we're facing in 2024. That is my disclaimer. Let's go around the room, and I'd love it if each of you could sort of introduce yourself to the fine audience and say a bit about what you do, please. Starting with Marsha, because you're our newbie on the show. Yay.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Marcia King. I am a director of business development for a healthcare staffing firm.
Thanks, Marsha.
I'm David Booker. I have been in sales for just over 130 years. And I started out as direct sales, moved into management of sales, VP of sales. For about 15 years, I was essentially a chief revenue officer, although my title was chief operating officer, but it was all revenue driven. Last few years, I've been involved in coaching. I've coached VP of sales. Typically, I coach people into new roles. So I'm looking forward to having a lively discussion today and perhaps talking about the underlying requirements to be a great salesperson.
Brilliant.
Julie?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I'm Julie Robinson, and I've been in the staffing career for a very long time. Not 130 years, David, but close to, can I just say. And I've always been in a sales capacity. I tried my hand at fulfillment and 360, but wasn't very good at that. So I've been, I always to the side of sales, and I think that suits my personality and style better. So I've always been in sales. Most of my career has been in staffing sales. And now I own Raymond George Consultancy, which the fine Mr. Coluccio is one of my teammates, colleagues. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Julie. I never introduced myself. I'm going to do that actually this time for once and probably make a habit of it. So I'm Rick Coluccio. For those of you who do not know me very well, and some of you will know this about me, I was in the music business for years and years. I used to be on the radio in Montreal back 20 plus years ago. And I dropped out of college to start a record label and did all that kind of good stuff for a long time. Was in tech sales to fund my music career and did a couple of odd jobs here and there. Fell into staffing very late in my life, I guess, compared to some. I was in my 30s already when I moved to Toronto to start staffing. And that was over a decade ago. And it's been a great ride. So here we are. Fast forward to this day and this podcast. It's the next big event. Okay, so let's get into topics. Danny will join us. Maybe we can do this retroactively. But on our agenda, the first topic, and I'd like to still start with this one. I added a new one, which I'm really passionate about. We can wait a sec to get there. But first topic is honestly just like sort of a market check-in. It's been really crazily up and down in terms of like from a sales perspective, how do you know when people are either hiring or going to spend at all through COVID, right? We've seen COVID happen and then a massive hiring, almost way too much hiring, salaries going crazy in 2021. Now for 2 years, it's been a really difficult, challenging market. What are you guys seeing as we round out 2024 changes, challenges? How do you feel about the market right now?
So I can start with that, Rick. So the SIA reported mid-September, mid-October, about a 13% increase in job orders in the U.S. healthcare market. What we are seeing in our firm is that market rates have stabilized over the last 6 months. We're even starting to see some specific markets that are increasing rates again, which, is very interesting to see, as we thought every hospital in America would just slash rates. But as they're finding, nurses and healthcare workers in general are still resistant to take lower rates, because obviously some of the rates are going back to kind of a pre-COVID time, not quite as low. And then, of course, with the changes in prices in the US and living in the US, does a travel nurse want to leave their home for not much more than they're going to make on a travel assignment? So it really depends on the why of the nurse. Do they want just different experiences? Are they really trying to kind of leverage their travel experience to help increase their possibility to be considered a leader by going back home in 2 years because now they've had all these new experiences? That could be one reason someone would take the same rate to work somewhere else. Or if it's just a matter of, really enjoying the change of atmosphere. So it's a bit encouraging for me as a business development person. I like to see those rates going back up so that we can entice those nurses to get back to work.
Yeah, I think, income versus cost of living is such a hot topic, both in Canada and the US, but not being able to afford it. So rates going up just feels like, okay, so it's not the end of the world. We're not going to devolve into looting. And okay, good. That's good here. That feels hopeful.
So my thoughts on I would say more of a micro level. Everything is cyclical, of course, and it depends what occurs in the marketplace. So Rick, you just mentioned, the world isn't coming to an end or whatever. Of course, it's not. Things go up, things go down, and for me, particularly in the small to mid-sized market, small to mid-sized businesses. It's even more cyclical than maybe in the large, industries or the larger industries or what am I thinking about here, like banks, insurance companies, whatever. In the smaller areas, small business, there's more of even more of a cyclical impact. So we came out of the COVID, and I think we went into a little bit of a period where companies were refining themselves, and so we had a little bit of an uptick, and then things seemed to go a little bit quiet once things are settled out. I think that there are certain things occurring in the world right now that may put people a little bit on edge, and maybe they're considering, where do they get their growth, or should they grow just yet? Certainly in the US, I would expect that the current election process is having an impact. But equally, disruptions in the marketplace, whether it's technological, whether it's biological, whatever the disruptions are, there are pockets, and this is what I've noticed recently when I've been speaking to executives. There are pockets of companies that are exploding, meaning in a good way, meaning that they're suddenly hiring. A company I was speaking to recently went from literally 4 employees at the beginning of the year to 60 right now, and they're expecting to double in the next few months. And so there are pockets of disruption that are causing high recruitment requirements. But generally speaking, I think that we might be in one of those lulls at the moment, awaiting for a bit more stability in the marketplace, and then I think there'll be a bit of a catch up. And in some respects, you could say it mirrors the markets, the stock markets, although they've been pretty good lately. But generally speaking, when there's an ongoing upsurge, then we find that recruitment would go up as well. So I think on the SME type businesses, small, mid-sized enterprises, I think that there's pockets. It is cyclical, but I think once some of the world issues have calmed down a bit, so hopefully next year we'll see another uptick in recruitment requirements.
I'd actually, I don't know if you're going around sort of deliberately here, Rick, but I'm going to add to this. And I actually agree with you completely, David. And the only thing that I would add to that is it feels like, well, it doesn't feel like at all, I think it is opportunistic hiring in some situations who've got the cash flow to back it. Versus conservative. I think, I know that's not the party if we're in England, but it's like conservatism and balance versus, okay, there's an opportunity here. And I think that those folks who are opportunistic are seizing this moment. And that's what we're seeing as the ones who are in high growth mode, which is unusual, but still present. And it's in the sort of the SMB sort of markets, I would say. So that's the only thing that I would add to what you just said, but I completely agree with what you're saying in all facets. Here's Danny.
Hello.
Here's Danny.
So sorry about being late.
No worries.
Couldn't be helped. Calls that pop out of nowhere.
This is the nature of the beast. Danny, thank you for joining us. We've already gone around the room and introduced ourselves. So if you could maybe just introduce yourself and a bit about what you do for our lovely audience.
Sure. My name is Daniel Iriardi. I sit in northern Michigan and in Traverse City, obviously my house. I run the sales function for the contract arm of the tech staffing at Robert Half in Midtown Manhattan in New York. And I run a few other programs that they have within Robert Half in New York. And I'm working with Rick and Julie on some other things too. And I thought this would be a great idea to jump on and talk shop a little bit.
Absolutely. And to catch you up as well, first topic going around the room, which everyone has just shared on, was just in terms of market temperature check. That's how I like to start this thing. I mean, obviously as salespeople, we're on the front line talking to people who are going to spend money or hire. And it's been really up and down. How do you feel that things have evolved in 2024 in general? Are we stable? Are we hopeful? Is it the end of the world? That was, I think,
that's cool.
General.
I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't know if anyone. We all think it's going to be. Usually, I thought 2008 and 9 was the end of the world too.
Yeah,
but
touche.
The temperature, I think, is exactly the same. It's sort of tepid. It's slow. It's drawn out. I don't know if that's the new normal and if we have to get creative on the staffing front and seeing what AI is going to do from here, or, spending with tech groups in particular. But from what I can see is it's remained pretty calmly, not great, but also not the end of the world. So I'm optimistic. I'm not seeing any trends the last month or two that suggest things are going to skyrocket, but it's impossible to tell because most companies I'm dealing with are saying we do have needs, but we're going to wait till 2025. Last year it was no, go away.
Yeah,
make of that what you will.
I mean, slow, yes, but I think we can all agree that 2023 was crickets, and 2024 is just, it's slow, it's long, but at least there's something. Agree. There's at least people are doing something, which is.
I'd agree. Yeah, 2023 was a cemetery. 2024 saw too many financial officers involved in the conversation, and then hopefully they pull back some of those limitations on what hiring managers can do. I don't see how much longer they can go without bringing in talent that they're going to need to stay competitive. So I imagine it has to be a better year.
I'd also add to that and actually sort of ask a question there too. So I think whatever the answer is to the question of like what hiring needs might you have, which is a very sort of simple question. I think the answer is somewhat dependent on the relationship and depth of the relationship that you have. Because I think that can be a very sort of, depending on who's asking the question and what level of communication or how many conversations they've had. It can be a very easy, this is a blanket statement to most sort of 98% of people that might ask me that question. But for some folks that might have better, deeper relationships, I might give you some nuggets that will give you an opening at some point or even now. Which potentially could be confidential for whatever reason, or just an entree to what's going to happen next. So I hear what you say, and I get that too. In fact, I don't even get that. I get just nothing, crickets. So no one, some people don't even have a conversation with me whatsoever, but others will give me the scoop on what is happening. I think because of the level of communication and depth of conversation that we already have. So I don't know if you've got any view on that, Danny, but I'd just like to add that.
For sure. No, that's a great point. New business, companies I may have worked with on a very small scale over the years, nothing. They don't. I don't know if they know what's going on. The folks, of which there are quite a few that I've worked with a lot over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, I'm not getting crickets from them. I'm definitely getting, the want to hire, the want to bring people on, the want to have a role for me to work on. Just the best answer I can also give, at least in my mind, is all of those folks, those talent acquisition folks, between them and the hiring, they're still there. They're still, involved in the machine of whatever company, large or small, that we work with. So in my mind, I mean, like in 08, 09, I completely had to turn over my contact list. It was a complete new world. That I haven't felt. There's been a sort of a bloodletting of talent acquisition folks for the most part, but on the lower level, I haven't. The folks that are running the orgs, they're still there. They're still talking. They're still my friend. So when they stop being my friend, that's how I'll know that it's over.
Well, there you go. As long as we still have friends at the top, we're all still eating.
That goes for everything.
Yeah, for everything in life. Just FYI, anyone watching. Yeah, so I mean that's okay. So that's the external factors in sales, right? Is sort of starting to see, how we feel about the market. Is it shifting? I don't think any of us know. I said at the beginning of this, Danny, too, that it's like by next month-end sales panel, the election will be over, which seems like the last excuse. People are like, oh, it's interest rates, oh, it's inflation, all those things are changing for the better. The only bugbear left, is the election. So we'll see next month on if that's sped things up at all. But from an internal perspective, and this is something that we spoke with David about when he was on, we were talking about his book, Jump, Splash, Swim, 2 weeks ago. And Marsha also brought up as well, challenges for sales sometimes can be on an internal sort of organizational front. And if you guys want to maybe take that, Marsha, I think you were talking about sort of, sometimes you face like lack of, we just had someone say true. I love it right away. Bam. Comment. True. Thank you, sir. Validation. Yeah, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about, sort of things you've observed, like lack of buy-in on interdepartmental sharing, for example, if you wanted to maybe take that topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's I think within any organization there's a nice Venn diagram. There's a point where things can overlap, whether that is, okay, these two departments recruit similar types of candidates. Therefore, if this department has a candidate that's available, why not market them to the other departments, right? Because maybe there's a synergy there. Maybe there's a client that they just got off the phone with that needs that exact type of client. But if we're not having some type of internal conversation or internal hot candidates list that are available from this company to go out to market, if we don't have that happening, why don't we have that happening? And what are some strategies that we can get buy-in from our coworkers? Because if this company is strong, we're all strong. But if we miss even one deal a week from a 20 to 30 minute conversation that we could have, that's 52 deals a year. In my industry, that's $500,000 in sales and revenue. So just by having a quick 20 or 30 minute conversation. So I guess it surprises me when there is resistance. And I think that maybe the resistance comes from people not seeing the why that's important or the how that can actually impact each person sitting in that call. But with markets the way they are today, where so many people are getting laid off, in my mind, I'm thinking the stronger any company is, the more likely it is that we all keep our positions. So that's just kind of the topic I wanted to throw out there, and maybe hear from the panel today, things that might have worked in companies you're in now or previous companies, or like David, folks that you're coaching, what you've seen work to get the buy-in from folks in other departments.
Yes, I would be happy to respond to that. I just want to mention something that is Danny rather than Daniel. Is that right? Danny,
whatever works.
Okay, I'll call you Danny. That sounds good.
Perfect.
You mentioned that the clients that you've worked with for a long time you're not getting crickets from them. You're hearing them. You're hearing from them. And I think this is a very obvious thing to say, but it's worth pointing out that no matter how things have changed over the last 2, 3, 4 decades of selling, relationships are still central. And so when we develop those relationships, not just because there's necessarily a sale in it in the next quarter, but because we want to stay connected for a long period of time, I think that's the bedrock of a successful career. And so the relationships, I just wanted to re-emphasize that. Looking on the inside, and Marcia, your comments, there's something that I find that there's 2 reasons why I think cross-functional collaboration doesn't happen. There's probably a lot more reasons, but 2 quick reasons that come to mind. Number 1 is because we're busy. And so I have what I have to do, and I don't take the time to kind of sit up and think, I wonder what they're doing in that department or whatever. So there's the individual aspect where I'm busy. And so I want to focus on the things that are directly important to me, and especially if my calendar is chock-a-block, which mostly they are in the recruitment industry. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because I don't know why I should. So even if I did think about it, I don't actually understand why I should. And this is where I believe leadership should step in and play an active, collaborative role to bring people together and to identify why you should. And to talk about why you should would be a podcast on its own, I think, Rick, but because there's so many different great reasons why we should collaborate. The one thing I will say, I'll conclude here, and I know I haven't answered your question, but it's just in my mind, I say, people are focused on their own thing and they don't understand why they should collaborate. Earlier on in my career as a direct salesperson, when I moved into management, after about a couple of months, I realized that, gosh, if I knew what I know now when I was a salesperson, I would have been even better. And I remember distinctly thinking that why didn't I understand how this business ran to the level of detail that I now do? And as I went up the career ladder to the executive role, oh my gosh, I've become a super sales guy because I know everything there is about the company. So why do we wait? Why do companies wait until their people have been promoted to expose them to the finer workings of the business? Because if you introduce cross-functional activities and reasons and insights about the company, your answer for the salesperson most of the objections that they're going to get. And so I feel what is critical in companies is when you bring a salesperson in, make sure that they have a thorough understanding of everything about the business. Give them an opportunity to continually ask questions about other areas of the business. And what will happen is they will either become a much better salesperson, or you might uncover a diamond in the rough for a different area in the business. So there are so many benefits to it. So for me, it all begins with knowledge. So why don't people communicate cross-functionally? It's because they don't really know that they need to. So we need to, enhance that desire to do so.
That's a really good point. Danny, Julie, you guys want to
I mean, I can add a less worldly view. I can add a view from my own experience in my organization, which is, in addition to that, I think what we've seen over the last year or two has been obviously a diminishing market, which has affected the revenue and the ability to bring in GM for a lot of not just the new hires, but the middle level folks and even the top producers have seen their incomes drop drastically. And when that has happened, it's clear that I can see anyway that people tend to hoard the part of the business, whether it's their candidate or their client or their intel, their data, whatever. And then it becomes almost you're competing with everybody around you, including other divisions within the company, which just limit the ability for the company to expand and grow, but then worse off, limits that salesperson. That's the part they don't see the most, to David's point, that they're just completely blinded whether it be just not knowing why or being afraid to, as a result of them giving away something that could be their saving grace for that period, that quarter, that month, whatever. And I mean, I don't want to be negative. But I would kind of tantamount that to ineffective management to some degree, because when things are down and things aren't great, that's when you need effective managers to step up and have you look from different perspectives, expand the perspectives. So that's something that concerns me a little, that I've seen within my organization. People that I thought were solid managers have sort of withdrawn as things got worse, and didn't help illuminate the best parts to get past, the negative part of the business to the folks that are either new hires or, again, middle hires. There are top producers that existed 3 or 4 years pre-COVID that had a market that was so much better that they took advantage of. And when things went south, I think they exposed themselves, those sales folks, as maybe not being as worldly as they thought they were and more dependent on the market, which tended to kind of cycle downward. And it doesn't help the kids sitting next to them to not see an approach that can benefit from being more, if you can work with 9 different lines of business within your company and find ways to expand your intel and to get data that can grow your business weekly. That's just from a personal standpoint, as that I've seen.
I think that it boils down to your point. It boils down to the personal mindset of seeing everything from a fear-based mindset versus an abundance-based mindset, that there's enough to go around for everyone. Even in a downturn market, there's always a market.
Sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's just different. It's different conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different. And I actually think from a collaboration perspective, so if to your point, Marsha, if we can collaborate together, that is a major force. And the competition, I think, to your point, Danny, if we can sort of think about competition is outside, not inside. It shouldn't be inside. It's got to be outside. If we're competing internally, that's, feels like not a great situation. So there's plenty, even in a downturn market, there is still opportunity because there's so many businesses in business that there's market share somewhere. It's just figuring out where it is and going after it together, which I think makes a stronger unit. And if there's an organization that we know of that is competing internally, fighting internally, perfect. I'll go after their stuff. Thanks very much. Lovely, because their eye is off the ball.
It's that Spartan mentality. We've got to put our shields up and march together,
Yeah, absolutely. But just going back to the cross collaboration. So I think that for whatever reason, I do think that this is an undervalued and underexposed area. And I think that if organizations can figure out a way to manage that so that there is benefit internally, it should actually be somewhere that we spend a lot of time for not only company benefit or individual benefit, but actually for candidate benefit. So I think that if we are able to cross-fertilize what we do with our people, then there will be a domino effect, which is actually why we all do what we do. It's because we actually want to place people in jobs. And yes, we all benefit from it financially. Yes, we do. Perfect, lovely, that's all great. But the core is that we place more people in the jobs that they want.
And it occurs to me that as the survival instinct that Danny you're referring to, there is a definite requirement and there is a certain internal desire to make sure that I'm okay. And there's nothing selfish about that. We have to make sure that I'm okay. Otherwise, if I'm not okay, then I can't help other people. But what I do suspect is that where you have organizations that are in silos, and silos are designed for a reason, to keep the experience together. So if you've got a practice that serves the finance industry or CFOs, whatever, and you've got a practice that is for the sales, and you've got a practice for this and a practice for that, it's very possible, very easy for us in our silo to only focus and talk to our clients about the financial side of recruitment. So the gold mine, the untapped gold mine, is how can I, who's selling sales personnel, to talk to somebody in the finance side and collaborate on not what we do, but what our clients need. It's very possible that we'll uncover the fact that Danny, you've been dealing with your clients for the last 10 years and there's no crickets there, they're chatting to you. But somebody else in a different division might be able to make some service, provide service to your clients, and you don't know about it. And the client doesn't know about it, therefore. So they might be going somewhere else to get that service filled when your company could have served that. So I think just, as we think of cross collaboration, even if it's just, let's talk about our clients, let's talk about what they're trying to do, who are their clients, how can we help them from a holistic perspective and try and move out of our silos, not so that, partly it's going to be so that we can do more business, but as Julie pointed out there, it's so that we can help our clients do more business. And so I tend to think these untapped mines are where we have these silos, they're not talking to each other, and there's a great deal of opportunity that is overlooked because of fear. The competition aspect.
Yep, makes total sense. And the internal collaboration, I mean, this is just anecdotal before we move to the next topic, but I've found that selling staffing, as I do every day, to people, what sometimes gets them excited is if you hear that they're in a culture where they are not compensated, motivated, and the value system of their higher ups isn't cross collaboration like that. And then you have a client where it is, that alone, it's not necessarily a higher commission percentage, but being commissioned on splits within different industries that you work on within the client does land really well for salespeople, particularly who are frustrated with that. So everybody who has created a really attractive model for cross collaboration, that's where your talent's going. FYI, hiring managers, sorry to break it to you, but that's what they respond to. When you get to talk to a good salesperson about what's frustrating them, that's one of the few things. Not even necessarily like an extra $5,000 on the base or whatever. Sure, everyone wants more money up front, but if you can solve something that's getting in the way of them billing a lot more and being frustrated, that's powerful in terms of people making an actual change, I've found.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I also think, I've thought about this too. If I was new kid on the block, rookie, starting a desk in maybe, let's say, a new sector or a new business or whatever it is, and I haven't done this before, or if there's something new which is an obstacle which I'm going to try and break into a bunch of contacts that I haven't spoken to before. It's like, what would I actually do, and how would I be successful at that? So yes, obviously I can pick up the call and I can do an email sequence, I can hang out at a coffee shop, I can do all these things, but like, how successful will I really be, and within what period of time? Because that is hard. Breaking into that new set of people, it's difficult, and it will take a period of time. So my point is, if there are relationships internally, however, whichever pocket they're in, as a new kid on the block, let's just say, or a new person, would I be more successful trying to leverage those and literally going around everyone's desk or wherever they are and sort of like, okay, who do you know? And blah, blah, blah. Would it be better and more successful for me to do that from day one, rather than sitting here sort of like banging out phone calls to people that I may get one call back out of 200 or something like that? And honestly, I think the answer is probably yes. I think it would. It probably would be. So if I was hiring a salesperson, I think actually I'd probably encourage that rather than here's a list of dormant or just brand new. Because I think that the likelihood is, if you like to do a test on that actually, that we'll probably get further forward faster just by leveraging what is already existing and then sort of building the relationships through that mechanism, rather than just like, oh hi, it's Julie. So I actually think that this in totality is a very important, could actually solve quite a lot of new business generation problems that a lot of us face, whether you're new or tenured in the business. It's like, here's a fabulous opportunity. or you just do harness, which may or may not be supported by the organization that you're in. But you know what? Who cares? If you see bottom line results, they'll buy into it.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, I just, reminded us all of the 6 degrees of separation. Mm-hmm. Guys, if we just start talking to each other, we're probably going to figure out that this person knows that person that knows that person that we need to talk to. And we don't utilize that enough, I think.
No,
most organizations.
I completely agree. So strangely enough, I live in the sort of the country, and I just drove half an hour to meet a candidate. And while I know no one in this town apart from now her and the person, one of my team that was there. And while I was in the coffee shop meeting her, I happened to meet the one other person that is that lives in this town that also used to work for me at some point. But I mean, so it's like, how strange is that? I know no one else that lives in that town whatsoever. So yes. And that could then, yes, I also think that going out is another, actually getting out of your home office, potentially if you're in a home office, but it's the best way to create something. And to your point, Marcia, yeah, I mean, the connections that you actually have are vast. You just might have to go an extra mile to get there to be able to leverage them.
But this will take us to another topic then, which usually ends up at the end, and we rarely get to actually in these sales meetings, which is the sort of the future and how this can look going forward in a positive sort of way, talking about solutions, ways of looking at this more differently. I'm going to throw this out there just as an observation. I'd love all of you to weigh in on this if you have opinions on it. But it feels like the measure of a salesperson at the core is what they want to know is what, in a silo on their own, separate from the rest of what the company is doing right now, will they bring through sheer will and grit, they use the word grit a lot, and whatever else, of grinding it out and having resilience to speak to either dormant relationships, like you're saying, Julie, and rekindle them, or bring net new relationships to the table, not even really furnishing them a lot of tools, I find. Some tools, sure, but not lots of branding, like not a lot of help, actually. And that's the measure of a good salesperson, right? And if that person, it's not about the qualities they have or whatever, or even the network they have. I've tried to sell based on network for the past few years. That used to be a thing 10 years ago. When it's not really anymore, I don't find, because they're like, yeah, they have a network. But as soon as that network runs out, what about their grit and their whatever else? Are they going to make 100 cold calls a day and bash their head against the wall to be able to get it going? So it is not a collaborative idea. It's not how well are they going to collaborate with everybody else and share information and how our network's going to drive together, right? It's on your own. We're gonna stamp the moniker on you, but aside from that, you're on your own. And how much quantitative stats, how high are quantitative stats, and that's how we measure good salespeople. The more qualitative, as in, what are you adding to the team? How are you guys collaborating with each other, sharing and networking, whatever? I would put that more on the qualitative side. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I feel like that is undervalued currently and has been for a while. But I do feel like we're ripe for a change there. How do you guys feel about that sort of mentality?
I think that any company, again, especially a relatively small company, they'll want to know the KPIs, the things, the cash flow. What are you doing for me today? What are you doing for me tomorrow? And so there is a dominant value, you might say, for the leaders of a company, the owners of the company, to want to know what we're doing. And so that's what gets prominent recognition. But that's always been the way. I don't think that's any different today than it was, yesterday. However, the qualitative side that you referenced, Rick, has always been what drives it. Yeah. So really, the activity and the sales is some more of a result of the qualitative side. And I'd like to go back to something you said there, Julie, about is it better to make 200 calls a day, or is it better to get to know the people around when that you're going to be working with? I would agree that getting to know the people, getting to know the practices, the processes, etc., is extremely important. But I would say it's both. And I always recommend, and I'm not saying that you weren't saying that, Julie, I'm just framing it myself. But I will say, in conclusion here, Rick, that your comment there is that I think it's incumbent, especially now that we're doing so much online as opposed to in person. I think it's incumbent on a salesperson, whether they're new or experienced, been around for a long time, to plan and be very aware and be very deliberate of what they're doing. So I spend X, not me personally, but one might spend X amount of time doing the activity. And I'll make sure that I do X number of calls, X number of speaks, X number of visits, whatever. So I'm doing the activity, but not at the ignorance of, I will make deliberate connections that aren't about sales. It's about relationship building, internal and external. I will spend specific amount of time on that, and I will do a specific amount of educating myself about my marketplace, about my own company. So there's a whole mixture of things that, the world goes up and down in different cycles, but these fundamentals, the activity, the relationship building, and the knowledge building have always been there. And I think they always will be there, even if they take slightly different vehicles to get there.
I completely agree. And I think what Rick is actually sort of saying is that it is when we just talk on about sort of volume, sort of the volume. I don't know that people, if you're new to the industry or new to sales, I don't know that some people understand that there's so much more than just the volume, because I think that's what a lot of organizations talk about every day. It's just like, you've got to do this amount of calls, and and there's nothing else that sort of cushions the amount of calls that you might have to make or outreaches that you have to make. So it's almost like the pieces aren't put together, as you just succinctly did, to make it more meaningful, which will get you further faster. I think that was sort of some of what Rick was trying to say. Is that fair, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of tied into what we were saying before, right? Like, and again, without naming organizations or being negative toward anybody at all, just, there are some organizations where if you make let's say, for example, you have a relationship with someone in New York and the company has an MSA signed already with the same company in California, you'd be discouraged from leveraging your relationship with the person in New York. You'd be encouraged to hand that off to the person in California who scored the MSA before you and not paid on it, which is demotivating to do so in the first place and not necessarily very effective. And then they'd say, wait, we already have that relationship, so your relationship you brought to the table is of no value to us. What is of value to us is what net new grinding you do for us today. Those environments tend to frustrate salespeople in a down market right now, right? And I have an easier time pulling them out of there when I uncover these stories and then say, well, if you went to this organization, FYI, same scenario, you would be encouraged to do it. They would say, good job. It's a good thing you have this relationship here. And you would just do a split with the person in California, 25-25 of the full deal. Both like the BD would go to the person who signs the MSA and the account management portion of it would go to you, and they'd say, congratulations, high five. Now they're still compensating that other person, but the vibe is very positive, right? And in a qualitative way, what they've created is a win-win for everybody, right? So the stat is not viewed as, oh, this guy can't sell, he's only selling to internal clients, which is a bit of the vibe, which to me comes from sort of like a slightly outdated, ego-driven and sort of like one-dimensional view of salespeople are equal net new and everything else is worthless to me, because it's sort of like an immediacy, like what's the word I'm looking for, a transactional sort of mentality towards your own employees. I'm paying you now, you create new things for me now, nothing else is of value. And I feel like that's falling out of fashion as I see good salespeople wanting out of that, even if they're performing well in that environment.
Well, and the benefit that happens there is now you have two employees that really want to see that account succeed.
Absolutely. And the brand is stronger.
Instead of fighting each other to like pull candidates out and not put them over here. Now you've got two people like, hey, do you have a candidate? Let's get someone placed this week. Now you've got great minds thinking alike. And to add to that too, I don't think the quantitative measures are ever going to go away, because what is measured generally does improve. But I think what doesn't get talked about or trained enough are the soft skills that are needed to build relationships, and that emotional intelligence, and realizing, during COVID days, people were picking up the phone just to say, how are you doing? I'm not calling to sell you anything. How are you doing? How's your family? Is anyone sick? That has stopped. right? Like, because we've kind of moved past that. But that's where a lot of my relationship building happened during COVID, when maybe I wasn't making a sale, but I was just saying hi to people. And, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of like, okay, well, now we're back on this track of we have to do in this hustle culture and get a new contract and bring something in to make sure that we're earning our positions every day versus like really nurturing those relationships. So I think it's important for us to remember that. And as leaders, to think about coaching and training on those things as well.
I would love to jump in on this. There's so many points that you hit that I was like, oh, wait, I want to speak to that. I want to speak to that. I want to speak to that. But David, one in particular was what you mentioned was that, all of the things that Rick was talking about, how that's pretty much what our job is, what staffing is, what selling is. For the most part, all of these things are going to continue as they have for 20, 30, 40, however many years. The vehicle changes. That was exactly the way my brain is processing is. I'm thinking of all these things we have at our advantage now to be able to reach people, to be able to find who the buyers are, to be able to get intel. All these are all because vehicles have been created and improved upon to allow us more intel and more, visibility to be able to do the things that are always going to be the things that we're going to do anyway. And then the other point to Julie, where you said, this I can go on for 3 days on this one, where, you either emotional intelligence will lead you to do a job, to be selling, to be doing your role on a regular basis within an organization based upon how they want you to do it, how your leader wants you to do it, et cetera. And at some point, emotional intelligence does have to come in and say, well, I'm getting some successes here doing something they're not telling me to do regularly. If I'm doing that, I can encompass what they want from me in addition to what I see as succeeding in a marketplace that's expanding or changing or minimizing or whatever. You have to come up with ideas as a salesperson to get out of that box and to find success. And to get into a very specific niche area, I work in an organization, which is what Rick, you made very clear. You get a role in New York, and let's say that they have an office in LA. You get that role to LA. They allow you one split. Then you get credit on that first deal. They can place 500 more people there. You're out of the game now. And the rep in LA is handling that. That is an organizational edict. That's not changing. But I have relationships all over the country with other folks of my tenure, and we outright ignore that with the relation to each other. Whenever we cross-pollinate and send clients to each other, we retain a percentage of the GM on all of those deals all of the time. Is that everyone is gaining benefit from that? No. Frankly, when you're dealing with people that have a long amount of success within a large organization, that person's going to be around tomorrow. They're going to be around a year from now. So there is a level of like, if you're just goose stepping to exactly what a company wants, I just don't know any company that's going to have the special sauce from that standpoint. But if you're getting out of that box, retaining some of the things that your org wants, they're there for, if they've been around for a long time, they're doing some things right. So I get it. But it requires new blood. It requires, I have new hires that make me think of something that go, that's a really, I should look into doing that more. And I've been doing this for 20 years. This person's been here 3 weeks and they just figured something out. If we blind ourselves to listening, especially now coming out of COVID and where there's sort of a new marketplace, your ideas are not going to come from the guy that's been doing it for 20 years, who basically was there at the advent of LinkedIn and had to learn how to figure, how to add contacts into my system based upon literally hours and hours and hours of scanning on LinkedIn. Now you have all of these repositories where you can get hundreds of thousands of contacts a day, at your fingertips. It's the kids that are going to figure out ways to get out of that and to improve on that. So from that standpoint, when you see that more often, when you see innovation from the newbies, and that should spread like wildfire. And what scares me over the last couple of years is what I've seen anyway in my organization. The new hires are more pressured to retain the values of what the organization wants because they're under a lot of duress through this marketplace. So I'm not seeing the innovation personally. I'm sure it's existing elsewhere, and Rick will help me find those places. But from what I could see in my organization, the kids are not, they're not given the reins with which to innovate. And once in a while, you're going to get a phenom that's going to ignore any restraints and wait ahead. That'll be the winner. So from that standpoint, I do get some concerns.
But that brings it back to. But that brings, I love everything you're saying, Danny, and that brings it back to what you were saying, David, though, too, is that, if organizations wouldn't wait for new hires to get promoted and move up the ladder before they understand the way the company works, and they were training them fully with more of an understanding to begin with, then probably we would see this innovation a lot more from new hires if they understood what was going on.
You know, Rick, and I agree. Again, I'll agree with what you were saying there, Danny. Especially the formation of what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do it, and the frog march kind of a thing. You've got to do this. I would say, Rick, that we as individual salespeople have to take responsibility for ourselves and not just follow the tune of the company. Now, I'm not saying that you should be a maverick, but what I am saying, and I propose this to everybody I speak to, is that we need to take an interest in our own capabilities. I call this human middleware. We have to understand what our biases are, what our own values are, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And once we have a clear idea of who we are and what we're capable of, we can then align ourselves to the company goals, as opposed to the other way around, where the company is asking you to align to them. So you understand what you can do, and then you align it to the company goals. And there will be things that the company wants you to do that you know you're not very good at, and you either get someone else to do it if you can, or you learn about it, or you move on from it. But there's things that you're very good at, and you'll focus on those strengths, and that's where you're going to get the most return on your investment. So I think it's super important, for whether it's inside the company or invest in yourself, is understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, understand why you want to do this and how you're going to do it. And I would almost guarantee, and this is a big one, but I would almost guarantee you spend a couple of hours a week, not much, but if you spend a couple of hours a week in developing your own understanding of yourself and your own skills, I'll almost guarantee you'll double your income in a couple of years, and you will continue to double your income, and it becomes, exponential if you just spend a bit of time on yourself. Don't wait for the company to do it for you, because they've got lots of other things on their mind.
Love to add to that. It's funny how organizations, David, ultimately have no problem with how you attain the revenue or what you needed to attain in the end once it's there. That, frankly, the right organization, I would think, would say, hey, how'd you do that? Let's incorporate that into our daily, day to day. That's a great organization. That's a great led organization. Others might say, I don't care what you did, but you did it right, so keep doing it. Either way, you win. If you understand yourself, understand your abilities, and then take your abilities and factor them into your day to day.
And I will say from personal experience, because I did this when I was about 22, something like that, and it was like an epiphany to me. It made a huge difference. I didn't actually change my presentation. My pitch to the client was exactly the same, but I became a lot more organized in what I did around what I felt I should do, and it made a huge difference. And by the way, if there are companies that don't agree with what you're doing, then what they've just identified to you is that you're probably at the wrong company. So if a company is holding you back, then look for another company to provide it there, because there's got to be synergy between your flow and the company flow in order for you to be successful both sides.
I'm going to take a quick sec just to read some of the comments that have come in, because they're interesting, and then maybe squeeze in a last question here before we call it a week. Some people have been commenting, all excellent points. Danny, we got that. It was great to see you, Marsha. We are nothing without our candidates, so the experience for them has to be exceptional. And of course, banging on the same drum there. Yeah, we hit on that sort of idea as well. And then you've got someone here who just commented, I completely agree on this last topic. Emotional intelligence is crucial in sales. Never focused on call volumes or KPIs, rigid account ownership. When we move away from the idea of my accounts, it creates for a more collaborative flow, reducing the isolated, siloed mindset for account managers. Many companies miss the mark by prioritizing quantity or revenue over quality, overlooking the value of building genuine relationship-based client connections. This happens to be somebody I know started her own agency with some success. So thank you for that comment. Again, we're not naming people in the interest of privacy, but nice to see that there are other employers that we see that are very aligned. Just a quick, before we call it, this segues really nicely into one of the topics on the agenda there, which happens to be about personal branding and how there is more of an emphasis, I would say, in recruitment and in sales right now on personal branding for online outreach and so on. I'm wondering where you guys are on that. I'll give the brief. I mean, we're on something right now that is basically, my personal branding exercise, among others. And interestingly, doing this kind of content, people will sometimes say, "Oh, are you doing it to get inbound clients or candidates?" And the answer is kind of no, right? I mean, this is not the point. But what it does do is having a personal brand allows people to get to know me easily by looking me up when they look at my profile. And what I do find is that my outbound outreach is much more meaningful because people are more likely to get back to me very quickly, and more individualized works. That works for me. That's a formula for me. Obviously, it'll be different for everybody. How do you guys feel about the sort of advent of people pushing for personal branding in this sort of internet-based sale environment?
Well, as a saleswoman, everything is a sale. So personal branding, let's go.
I love how since COVID with the video call, you talk about relationships and connecting. Prior to COVID, I know there were video calls. I didn't really have any. To be honest, I was kind of creeped out by them. I thought, just a face popping up on my phone was weird to me. I couldn't get used to that. Once COVID happened, I've had this conversation with many executives of my company where they want to push phone calls, and that's fine. That has a place. But what my argument was, I'm seeing, especially during COVID and still now, the majority of my calls are in video, not a regular phone call. So I don't think in any way, in terms of relationships, I'm talking to people via video that I never would have met, or at least not seen in person for many, many calls in the past. So the ability to have a personal brand where people are seeing you regularly, if you have a client that you have regular conversations with, and they're almost always via video, on top of the fact that you have a personal brand, I couldn't agree more, Rick. I mean, it's a lot more trustworthy when people have evidence of what you've done, how you've done it, where you've been. A lot easier to pick up a phone, especially now when everyone just has no hesitation to just hitting video and then talking to anybody across the world. You can expand on that to have a personal profile you can go gangbusters, I think.
Faux show. I agree. David, Julie, any thoughts on that or anything else to close out this sales panel this month?
So for me, a brand is your reputation. It's what you're putting out there so that people, when they think of you, what do they think about you? And I agree, Danny, I've found the last 4 or 5 years, I take one phone call for probably 100 video calls that I do. It's very rare now. In fact, somebody called me, this is probably a month ago now. I'm thinking, what are you calling me for? Why aren't we online? Because I want to see you. Because when it comes to branding, I want to talk. I want to see a person. And the one great thing that came out of COVID is the fact that I see so many people now compared to before. Where I might have been able to see 2 or 3 people in a day to go out and visit them. Now I'm seeing 10 or 12 people in a day, and sometimes it's like this where there's a group of us together. And that branding, the way you say things, the intentionality in your eyes and everything around you, that body language says so much. So branding and online activity takes the phone call to a new level, and I'm certainly in favor of that.
And David, I have a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. Their grandfather called them on the phone the other day because he was in an airport and couldn't FaceTime. They heard his voice. My 4-year-old daughter grabbed the phone and was annoyed I can't see him on the screen, and gave the phone back. She didn't even have an interest in talking to him that she couldn't see him. So from where we live, video calls are obviously what we do every day. These kids don't even know what a normal phone call is. So that's where we're going.
That's a good point. It's an interesting point, for sure. Julie, anything you'd like to weigh in to close us out?
No, not really, other than I think both have a place. I say not really and then start talking. But funnily enough, I have, hardly anyone calls me these days. But I do have one client who I do see on video, but often calls me out of the blue, actually. And I think that the benefit of that is that you don't have to arrange it. So if you're arranging a video, then you both have to be at the same time, which actually takes time in itself. But he just calls me out of the blue and I'm either there or I'm not there, and I just call him back and he's either there or not there as well. So I do think, and it's actually quite novel to have a phone call. It's actually quite nice. But I've already built the relationship, and I think he feels the same. So it's more sort of ad hoc and more in the moment, rather than sort of having to be, in the right place at the right time that you've agreed. So I think there's a place for both. But in terms of your question, I think, branding online, I think people are uncomfortable sometimes in terms of branding online, when I've been uncomfortable doing that. And that it pushes you out of your comfort zone if you decide to take that leap. But I think once you've done it, it becomes more commonplace and more everyday, and the sort of the fear around that sort of does dissipate. So anyhow, I forget what the question is now, but I'm actually in for both. And I do think that it's incredibly important. Personal branding is incredibly important, is either success or failure, actually.
Yeah, and that seems to be the trend. For the record, we got on this phone thing. I'm still the guy who calls everybody. So now it's like when people get a voicemail from me, they're like, "Oh, okay, he does videos too." But I still call everybody. I still love the phone. I'm never going to change. I'm forever going to be that Glenn Ross guy who smiles and dials every day. I love it.
Rick, putting it in perspective as well, the realities of it. If you've got to make 100 calls a day or 50 calls a day, you're not going to be doing it on video. As Julie just mentioned, you've got to set it up, you've got to, then you've got to connect and whatever. So it just so happens that pretty much all of my communication is scheduled. So if it's not scheduled, if I'm making outbound calls, then I'm using the telephone. I'm just not doing outbound calls like that anymore. But.
For sure, yeah, and it does entirely depend. You're totally right. Well, we are over time. I'm so happy to have all of you here. I know we could probably keep this going for hours and hours, and I would love to, but I will let you all go and not steal you away from your actual jobs any longer than I must. Thank you all for being here. Thank everybody for watching and commenting. If you have questions for myself or Julie or anybody on the panel, and you're seeing this after the fact, please message us, and we'll pass along any messages or reach out directly. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. Bye-bye.
Ciao.